The F1 off-season has begun with a surprise early controversy, with the FIA beginning an investigation into allegations about Toto and Susie Wolff that have been emphatically rejected by the Mercedes F1 team and even Formula One itself. F1's governing body, the FIA, announced its compliance department is looking into an allegation of information of a confidential nature being passed to an F1 team principal from a member of FOM personnel. The FIA did not specify any individuals, but it didn't need to. The media speculation it says it is acting on has already done the rounds on social media, and Mercedes noted there had clearly been some off-record briefing to flesh out the FIA's generic statement. That's what initially led to the Wolffs being named as the subjects of the FIA's investigation and more specific allegations about them being detailed too. But it was then pretty obvious who the targets were once F1, Mercedes and Susie Wolff herself all subsequently confirmed they were the parties involved when they issued stinging responses to not just the allegations but the FIA's conduct. So what of the allegations? We know that the FIA is looking into the potential unauthorised disclosure of confidential information to a team principal and possibly vice versa. That's Susie Wolff in her position as F1 Academy boss and Toto Wolff as Mercedes F1 team principal and co-owner. The implication is that their respective positions create a conflict of interest if confidential information is being shared between them, with Susie presumably becoming a way for the F1 organisation to discover private information Toto learns from his role as team principal, and Toto being kept abreast of the inner workings of F1. It's at this point we need to stress that the Wolffs, F1 and Mercedes all reject any such allegations, which have so far not been substantiated beyond a single media report. Before this all blew up so publicly, many parts of the media, including us here at the race, were being asked why we weren't immediately covering the story based on the initial allegations. When a story breaks in this way, it's our job to then try to verify it through our own sources. If we can't do that, and nobody is speaking publicly about the story, there's not really anywhere we can go with it until something changes and/or the story moves on. And the bar for just taking another outlet's story as unimpeachably accurate is extremely high, and only gets higher the more sensitive the information is. And that all changed on Tuesday night. The story did move on when the FIA announced it was launching an investigation, and it then exploded when F1, Mercedes and Susie Wolff all hit back quickly with very strong statements. You might think there's nothing out of the ordinary with parties involved coming out and defending themselves, but the nature of how this all played out is unusual. Nobody was obliged to respond publicly to the FIA's statement, especially given that the announcement itself said so little. Yes, it mentioned an F1 team principal and a member of FOM personnel, but nobody was named and no other details were given. If this was simply a matter of those accused knowing they were innocent and being happy to wait for a process to prove that to be the case, they wouldn't need to speak about it. The F1 season is over, so they don't even have to be prepared to address it on an upcoming Grand Prix weekend. It's the perfect time of year to lay low if that's how you want to handle it. But not only did the FIA's announcement prompt a response, it prompted 3 separate ones, all released swiftly on the same night, and they were fierce. The first statement came from F1 itself, which showed there is no alignment between F1 and the FIA on this. F1 noted that it wasn't made aware of the FIA's announcement in advance, stressed its complete confidence that the allegations are wrong, and cautioned anyone against making imprudent and serious allegations without substance. Just 10 minutes later, Mercedes fired back too. Like F1, it said it had heard nothing of this investigation before the FIA's public statement was made. Mercedes called the allegations unsubstantiated, and while saying it had originated from a single media outlet, it also rejected the allegations made in associated media coverage, which it said wrongly impinges on the integrity and compliance of our team principal. As we mentioned earlier, it was clearly unimpressed with the off-record briefing around the story too. Susie Wolff then released her own statement around 45 minutes later, saying she was deeply insulted but sadly unsurprised by the allegations, which she said were baseless. She called the saga disheartening and expressed her belief that it seemed to be rooted in intimidatory and misogynistic behaviour that was focused on her marital status rather than her abilities. None of these statements were a simple case of rejecting the allegations or purely claiming innocence. These were an attack on what has happened so far and how it has been handled. There's always a certain tension between the FIA, which regulates F1, and commercial rights holder Liberty Media, but relations between the two have been getting worse for some time. This latest tiff might just be another skirmish in what has so far been a phony war, but it also has the potential to explode up into something far bigger. It's certainly another blow for the trust between the FIA and F1 that's already been in short supply. To understand why, it's necessary to take a broader look at the landscape. The FIA is not only the regulator, but it also owns the commercial rights. But because of European Commission demands to split its regulatory role from the commercial side, these were sold off as a 14-year deal in 1995, followed by a subsequent 100-year deal. That's why FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem likes to stress it is the landlord of F1 as well as the regulator. Liberty Media, of course, sees things a little differently. The FIA gets an income stream via the Concord Agreement and regulates and runs the nuts and bolts of F1, so race control, the stewards, timing, the technical departments, etc. And Liberty Media is working to steer F1 towards greater growth and prosperity. That dynamic has manifested itself as something of a power struggle. It's not the first time that this kind of thing has happened. Think the FISA-FOCA war of the early 1980s and the championship breakaway threats of the first decade of the 21st century. Today, a similar thing is happening, and there have been multiple flashpoints in 2023. In January, Ben Sulayem questioned rumours of a sale to Saudi Arabia with a $20 billion price being put on F1. He called that inflated. F1 responded by telling Ben Sulayem to butt out of commercial matters that don't concern the FIA. And while Ben Sulayem subsequently said he was moving back from day-to-day involvement in F1, he remains very active behind the scenes. That led to the next flare-up, with Ben Sulayem opening an expression of interest for new team bids. His argument was that the FIA was doing exactly what the regulator should be doing, given the Concord Agreement allows up to 12 teams. Liberty Media was not happy, but the FIA eventually accepted a bid from Andretti, which still awaits commercial approval or rejection from F1, and don't underestimate how contentious that process has been. So this is the third flare-up. That Ben Sulayem's FIA is looking into the accusations of information of a confidential nature being shared is a clear broadside at F1, and the fact F1 and the Wolffs responded so forcefully suggests that it hit its target. There's also the wider question of the negotiation of the next Concord Agreement, which will start in 2026. The FIA is known to be pushing for more money, with Liberty Media understood to be giving that idea short shrift. This is all part of the same FIA versus F1 war that's raging quietly in the background. With growing talk in the F1 paddock about a potential breakaway, creating a new championship with the FIA far less involved, the question is whether this particular incident could ignite the tinderbox that is the political landscape of Formula One. The bottom line is that both the FIA and Liberty Media believe they are on the virtuous side, but they can't keep scrapping like this. This can do a huge amount of damage to F1, and it's incumbent on both sides to make this work. After all, for the millions watching, it's simply sport, and the petty political squabbles mean nothing, other, of course, than jeopardising the growth of F1. These spats can't keep happening, so that tension between two of F1's primary stakeholders has to be resolved, and perhaps this saga can be a trigger for that. But the priority here is resolving the investigation in question and getting to the bottom of the allegations. Information from the FIA on the process is sparse, but it seems to feed into its Ethics and Compliance Division, which the governing body says embodies a zero-tolerance approach towards misconduct. Within the remit of this part of the FIA are alleged or real violations of the ethical principles contained within the FIA regulations, for example, discrimination, harassment, bribery, corruption, conflicts of interest, fraud and money laundering. When someone or something is reported, it will be treated in 3 stages: initial assessment, investigation and conclusion. And although the word investigation has been used quite freely around this story, that's in the generic "this is being looked at" sense. We can probably assume that the FIA's actual process is currently only in the initial assessment phase. What that means is reviewing whether the concern of misconduct falls within the scope of this procedure and whether the allegation is supported by facts sufficient to warrant further inquiry. Should it proceed to the next stage, a timescale will be established for the investigation phase, and the Wolffs will get the opportunity to respond to the allegations. Even a full investigation may lead to no outcome though. The case will be closed if it finds there has been no misconduct. If the investigation reveals misconduct has taken place, the conclusions, supporting evidence, and any proposed corrective actions will be forwarded to another body within the FIA to take a decision.